Welcome to Vision to Venture, the podcast where we talk to leaders in the tech world. In each episode, we chat with entrepreneurs, tech experts, and leaders within the tech space to hear their stories. If you're curious about tech, starting a business, or just want to hear inspiring stories, this podcast is for you. Make sure to follow and subscribe to never miss an episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Vision to Venture. Today, we're joined by Jeff Glasson, CTO of Twaice. Jeff's journey includes pivotal roles at Next, Apple, VMware, and Cloudera, where he led engineering teams of all sizes and tackled complex technical and leadership challenges. Now, as CTO of Twaice, he's at the forefront of using software to drive innovation in energy and sustainability. In this episode, we explore Jeff's experiences working alongside Steve Jobs, scaling engineering organizations, and the evolving role of AI in technology. We also dive into the future of battery analytics and the biggest innovations in energy and software. Welcome, Jeff. Great to have you on Vision to Venture.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, perfect. So just to start off, Jeff, we'll maybe take it back to the early days. And you started your career in hardware, operating systems, and developer tools before transitioning into machine learning and now obviously battery analytics. What drove these shifts, and how did you connect these fields?
Well, it's a very interesting career arc I've had. I think, out of university, I did a computer engineering degree, which is kind of a hybrid hardware, software, electrical engineering, computer science. And so I've kind of always been interested in both the hardware and software parts of computing. And so my first job was to work on operating system kernels. I actually wrote a lot of assembly language back then. I wrote a lot of the hardware dependent pieces of effectively Unix or Linux kernels, porting it to new processors along the way. After I did that, I just started slowly moving up the software stack, first in kind of the user level pieces of a Unix operating system, and then Java application servers, and eventually into data warehousing and machine learning. And I think the reason I started doing that was more around where I thought the real innovation was happening and the different layers of the software. At the time, kind of operating systems were getting standardized and there wasn't a lot of real innovation happening there. And I thought the value and the innovation was happening in the application layers. And so that's what got me started moving up the stack. It was a very slow journey, but I'm pretty happy where I ended up.
Yeah. So basically, you saw a bit of a gap, in this space, and hence kind of made that transition, and maybe changed into that machine learning, more so from when you started, obviously in the hardware space.
Yeah, I mean, I think machine learning, AI, over the years, it's kind of been an interchangeable term. Some years, one of them is a dirty word, and then it kind of goes back and forth. I remember when we used to talk about AI, and it was kind of complete, marketing hype at that time. And so we kind of started calling things machine learning. Now AI is the buzzword. And so it's kind of interesting how I've seen over the years these cycles. And just like I used to say that there's not any real new problems in computer science. It's just that they recycle about every 20 years, 15, 20 years, but usually there's better hardware to help you solve the problems better. I mean, I'll use VMware as an example, right? Virtualization, when I was at VMware, was a very big hot thing. Working with Intel and AMD on the processor side to be able to virtualize machines. But that wasn't a new idea either. IBM was doing this in the 1960s with VM. And so, cloud computing, is it that much different than timeshare systems of the 70s, 80s, 90s? Not a lot, but there's a better hardware architecture and a better software architecture to actually solve things in a different, more efficient way.
Yeah, definitely. This episode is sponsored by Enigma. Enigma help connect machine learning and software engineering talent with groundbreaking opportunities in the field of AI. So whether you're a company searching for exceptional tech talent or an individual seeking that perfect role, Enigma is your go-to solution. Thanks to Enigma for sponsoring Vision to Venture. Yeah, Jeff, now just wanted to touch on something that obviously I found very interesting when you worked a bit, with Steve Jobs obviously a very well-known name, globally. So yeah, you're obviously working at Next. You were part of a small hands-on startup with Steve Jobs, obviously deeply involved. What was that experience like?
I think it was actually really cool. And I think for people that don't know what Next is, because I mean it's been a while now. So Next was a company that Steve started when he left Apple. And the goal of Next was to really take this user-centric graphical computing environment to the commercial desktop. And also building at the beginning of object-oriented development and be able to get code reuse and actually be able to do drag and drop programming and create applications without writing code. So that's where Next started. Originally, it was a hardware company too, trying to build proprietary hardware with a proprietary operating system and a proprietary runtime on top of that. I actually joined the company a few years after it started when they turned into a pure software company. And my job was to really port the Next technologies to different processor architectures, bring the operating system to third-party hardware, whether it be, IBM PC, Intel-based processors, or HP and Sun workstations. I think, I mean, honestly, of all the years I've worked in the industry, probably working at Nest was some of the best times I've had. We were, I wouldn't say super small. I think the company was about 200 people, so not a super small startup, but small enough that you knew everybody. Um, Work was intense, but good. I will say Steve is a challenging person, was a challenging person, I should say, demanding the best from everybody. And I think that really kind of percolated through the company where we really got a lot of things done with a relatively small team. I mean, when we got reacquired by Apple, it was interesting that, I was leading the operating system team at the time. I was managing that group. And what we were doing with 10 or 12 people, Apple was doing with 100 people in a much bigger company. Granted, millions of machines or hundreds of millions of machines versus thousands of machines and customers to support. But at the end of the day, I think we did a lot more with a very small number of people, and actually did some really cool things and drove the state of the art in a lot of ways. Mac OS 10, or now Mac OS, actually is founded on Next technologies. A large portion of what still is Mac OS was created at Next and then expanded on over the years since then.
Yeah, yeah. And I think maybe Jeff, something, that maybe you've learned, from your interactions with Steve, whether that have, been a lot of time you spent with him or even just brief interactions, and maybe a couple of things that you've learned from him that you maybe take forward with you.
I mean, I think Steve was an incredible visionary. I think he just kind of had this really rare talent of being able to figure out what people wanted before they knew what they wanted it. Right? And I think if you look at some of the things that he did when he came back to Apple with the creation of the iPod and the iPhone, right? There were Blackberries and other smartphones at the time. There were other MP3 players at the time, but he just knew what people wanted. And I think one of the things that I kind of take from that time is really this customer-centric view of everything, and really a user-centric view of it, I should say, right? And that you really want to care about and understand what a user wants and delight them with the products that you build.
Yeah, yeah. No, brilliant, Jeff. Thanks for obviously sharing, a bit about, your time spent at Next and, a little bit about Steve Jobs as well. Now moving on to you and, a bit about what you've done. I mean, you've led engineering teams of all sizes, from startups to big enterprises. What are the biggest leadership differences, when working at a company like Twaice versus your past roles at VMware or Cloudera and Apple?
I was managing over 300 people at one point at VMware before I left globally. I got a lot of miles and a lot of frequent flyer points
Yeah,
traveling, visiting the teams. But I think one of the biggest differences is for team size, right? And I think it's probably more important about team size versus company size overall. But when you're managing 300 people, it's super important to have really good leaders underneath you because you just can't keep in your head what everyone on your team is doing. And I think one day, I was at VMware for a long time, and a lot of people knew me just from being there for 10 or 11 years. But I remember when I had my big team, I was walking down the hall in one of the buildings and someone said, "Hi, Jeff." And I said, "Hi back." And I was like, after I walked away, I'm like, I honestly don't know if that person just knows me because I've been at VMware and is in my or is in my team. And that was a
Yeah.
really, really weird feeling because I never really had that before. And I really like to stay in touch with people. And so, I mean, that's one of the reasons I decided to go smaller again, is to really be more in touch with what's going on, really help people grow and mentor them. It's just hard when your organization is that big to really, really stay in touch with the people doing the hands-on work. That's the negative side of it. I think on the positive side of big organizations is that if you have good leaders underneath, you have to have good leaders underneath you, and you have to have faith and trust in what they're doing. Because the other part of being a leader in the technical world is to really trust your team. And your job is, and this is true from once you become an engineering manager with 6 people underneath you, your job isn't to do everything anymore. Your job is to empower your team to do their best and to do the best that they can. Um, and that's an interesting transition for someone with an engineering background who used to do everything. Some
Yeah.
people have a harder time than others, but um, the bigger your organization is, the more you are responsible for. I really believe the more faith you have to have and trust you have to have in the people that are in your organization.
Yeah. Yeah, Jeff, and you also touched on, in the beginning, you said you traveled quite a bit, meeting with the different members of the team, around the world. You've obviously yourself also worked across, the US and Europe. So
Mhm.
you would have seen, different leadership styles. How, would you say, should engineering leaders think about, these cultural differences when managing people? Because obviously people respond to different things, different people. They've been brought up differently, they've got different backgrounds. You know, how should engineering leaders think about these cultural differences, when managing these teams?
I mean, that's a really interesting question because I think there really are differences. And I think if people try to say there aren't differences, they're just trying to, cover up for something. But I think, I've managed teams that have spread US, Asia, and Europe, even before I moved to Europe. Um, and so there definitely are differences. If I look at kind of the Silicon Valley culture, it's just kind of 24/7, always on, right? Particularly at a company like Apple, right? There were times where people were working 7 days a week to get products out the door. That's certainly not the case in other geographies.
Yeah.
Um, and I think people need to understand that. They also need to be aware of time zone differences. I remember, and this was when I moved to Germany, at Contentful, where I was leading the engineering team there. We got we started building out a bunch of people on the west coast of the U.S. for the American market on the go-to-market side, and a bunch of leaders there. And Silicon Valley mindset, they didn't always kind of understand that, when you send an email that is 10 o'clock p.m. local time in Germany, you're not going to get a quick reply. And
Yeah.
I think you just need to really be just sensitive to those things. I think another when I had a team and we had a team split in when I was at Cloudera also, and I remember talking to a staff engineer one day in Palo Alto at the office there, and they said they were going to have an architecture meeting about this new feature, and I said, "Oh, did you invite anybody from our Budapest team to join?" And their answer was, "Oh, that's a good idea. Sorry, I forgot to do that." Uh, I saw them the next day after the meeting and they said, "Jeff, I invited the people. No one showed up to the meeting." I'm like, "Well, what time did you hold the meeting? I'm like, well, it was 2 p.m. California time. I'm like, do you know what time that is in Budapest?
Yeah.
And they kind of gave me a blank stare. I said, well, that's like 11 p.m. Would you expect people to come to a meeting at 11 p.m.? And they're like,
Yeah.
oh. So I think, I kind of got off the cultural difference a little more than the time zone skew, but I think it's all part of the same kind of considerations that a leader has to have, where you really need to, I've always believed to be a really great, effective leader, you need to push yourself out of your own comfort zone and put yourself in a way that your employees or members of your team um, are comfortable with. And that means how you react, how do you interact with people, how you are considerate about what they care about, and whether or not they live in a different country or of a different nationality or cultural background, I think plays into that. But it's part of this bigger, just be considerate and push yourself out of the comfort zone and make your employees the most comfortable they can be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you also need to always be, switched on when dealing with different people. You need to be,
Yeah.
as you say, sensitive to them. They respond differently. People respond differently to how you interact with them. I mean, I'm from South Africa, an incredibly diverse country. And I found obviously growing up through school, university, everyone's got a different story, and you need to be accepting and sensitive, to
Yeah.
everyone. You can't just have your way and accept that. But I also think though, Jeff, when it comes to teams that are diverse and, have cultural differences, it's actually sometimes really good. I think cultural diversity leads to innovation. I mean,
I agree.
there could be people, from different walks of life that think of something that I would never have.
That's certainly true. And I've seen that many times throughout my career. Um, you know, uh, I went through a period when, there was a big push to get more women into tech. I think that's not an easy problem to solve. I think I kind of look at this as if we want to get more women engineers, we need to get more women into university, into STEM majors, which
Yeah.
means you have to start earlier and get 10, 12-year-old girls interested in that. And
Yeah.
it's not a switch you can flip and make it better in a day. It's a very long journey.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Perfect, Jeff. Yeah, so now just to touch a little bit on, what you currently do, sort of drawn towards the energy sector. I mean, you've been in cloud computing, virtualization, SaaS, and now obviously battery analytics. What drew you to the energy sector, and how do you see software shaping the future of sustainability?
Was I drawn to the energy sector directly? I think that's probably not why I'm in my current role. I think I was drawn to background about why I chose Twaice is that when I was thinking about a new opportunity, I was looking for, I guess, something that really mattered. I'd worked in a lot of really big companies, built a lot of great products, but one of the things I wanted in my next role was in some way giving back to the world for kind of all the kind of blessings and success I've had in my career early on. And so I was thinking about, do I just go into advising? Do I go work for an NGO to kind of try and make the world a better place? And that was one of the criteria for my current job, which is thinking about what's the world going to be for my kids and others down the road. And so Twaice came along and happened to be in the energy space, happened to be a green tech company that is trying to help our customers accelerate their journey of electrification, both in the energy sector and in the mobility sector, which then hopefully reduces carbon emissions and slows down global warming. And so I think it's a very interesting topic. Plus, I think the other thing that really drives me is hard technical problems, and these are hard technical problems too to solve. So I think the combination of those things is really what brought me into my current role.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously, as I mentioned, and like you said, Twaice is at the forefront of battery analytics, and I think you briefly touched on it, about moving into this sustainability space, obviously thinking about future generations and yeah, just protecting the earth. But, what would you say excites you the most? And I know you touched on some of the challenges, that you enjoy, but what excites you the most about working in this space?
I think the biggest thing is just actually having an impact and building products. And I think this is true from all the jobs I've been super happy with, is it's really, you know, building a product that people use that makes their day a better day. And that is what really drives me at the end of the day. And the way with the current space that I'm in, there are some incredibly tough technical problems and discovery around what we need to do in this space. You can't go and do a standard kind of product discovery with customers in battery analytics because no one knows what they want because it's such a new field. And so this has the extra challenge of throwing stuff out and see what sticks against the wall, trying it with some ideal customer profiles and see if that's what they really want, because no one really knows how to solve some of these problems yet, or which problems are super important to our customers from a business perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect, Jeff. Yeah, and then just wanted to touch on maybe your first role, when you moved to Germany. You obviously mentioned, previously that you joined Contentful. You were the VP or the vice president there, of engineering. Maybe if you could just talk us through, what exactly does a VP or a vice president of engineering do? What does the role entail?
Well, I've had many VPs of engineering job, and I think it really depends on the company, the size of the company. A VP is one of those roles that can be anything, honestly, right? From leader of a team in a startup of 10 people to managing 1,000 people in a big corporation. And I think um, the role at Contentful was super interesting in that, the company was just starting its scale up journey. They had just raised some money again, and when I joined the company, um, had two first-time founders, had never really built a large organization before. I was hired to help scale the team because I had done this and managed large organizations at VMware and Cloudera before. And so when I joined Contentful, I think the engineering team was about 40 people. Um, Quickly, I was working with the CTO, the founder CTO, to hire a peer that I could partner with in product. That relationship between the engineering leader and the product leader is super critical. Um, People need to really, those people really need to work together closely all the time. And so once we did that, he and I did a lot of work around process and how we do discovery, how we develop. We brought in the Marty Kagan style double diamond discovery delivery process. He rebuilt the product team. I started hiring a bunch of people in engineering and scaling, and had to make a lot of changes around processes and how we do things because we were very, as I think a lot of startups are, very consensus driven in our decision making. When you're small, you could do that. Eventually, you get to a size that you can't get everyone in a room to make a decision and agree. So, how do you make sure people feel that they're still contributing, but you can delegate decisions? So, built a bunch of, I would say, pragmatic processes. I'm not a super process heavy person. I wanted just enough process is the right amount of process to help people do their job. And so really started working on clearing up team charters and team responsibilities. I created a staff engineering circle, which had senior people from all the different engineering teams that got together and to step out of their individual kind of team deliverables and think about broader platform architecture, build for scale, build for your reusability. And so I think, getting back to your original question, right, the job of a VP is to really own the delivery of the product, or products in our case, in many cases, right? So you are ultimately responsible for delivering the product that the business needs. And I think what a lot of VPs don't always internalize is that it's about the business. It's not just about being a great technologist and having a high performing engineering team that's meeting whatever metrics of the day there are that you measure to say this is a good performing engineering team, right? The DORA metrics out of Accelerate are kind of something for cloud computing, but you could have the best team in the world and build a product that no one wants to buy. And I think the VP has got to be accountable for both of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect. And Jeff, you also, you touched on when you started there, the team was about 40 people. I know you mentioned to me previously that you actually grew that team to roughly about 100 people in, 2.5 years. Obviously, you have touched on, in your previous answer or explanation, about a VP on what you did and what you implemented to obviously help that. But you obviously need to also get buy-in and belief from the people that you're bringing to build
Yep.
this team. So there's a lot of, I guess, key soft skills that are also needed,
Mhm.
to achieve this. What would you bring that down to?
I actually bring it down to one word, actually, which is trust, right?
Yeah.
You need to build trust. I think, and I've done this with most of the leader roles I've stepped into, is I know there's some people, and this probably is because of my Silicon Valley career start, right? This whole idea of I'm the new VP, I'm the new CTO, I have a 90-day plan to affect change, right? And a lot of people go in that way and just start making change because that's how they feel that, they were hired to change things. And in some cases, right, if it's a fix-it job where the company is in trouble, I will grant that that's probably what you should do. If you're stepping into a role where the company is performing and has a product, there's probably something that they've done correctly. There's probably a lot of things they're doing right. And there's probably some things that they could do better. And so the first thing I do when I step into a role is talk to a lot of people, listen, understand, build some credibility and trust. Um, and then hope, if I have to, you spend that credibility when you have to. But it's really, really hard to just step in and just do stuff because I said so as the answer, because people will not buy into that. You need to
Yeah.
get them to come along. And I think this is one of the things I really kind of draw the distinction between being a manager and being a leader, where I think, a manager will come in and dictate, right? A leader inspires and gets the team to follow them. And I think at the end of the day, you get much better results being a leader than being a manager.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I was actually going to, mention that I also think there's a big difference between being a manager and, a leader. You obviously want a leader more so than a manager. A manager can manage people and, like you say, dictate, but a leader is someone that, leads by example, sets the tone, gets everyone excited about something and, gets the team moving in the right direction. So yeah, Jeff, definitely agree with that. Obviously along the way, there's lessons that you would have learned and perhaps mistakes made that you move on, it's a lesson, and it never happens again. Looking back on your career, what would you say is one, maybe a couple defining moments that changed how you approach leadership or technology?
Well, I think, I think some of the things that really changed how that I don't know if it changed how I'm a leader or kind of formed how I'm a leader. It's kind of subtly different, but I think I learned a lot from horrible managers that I reported to, honestly, right? Where I learned a lot of what not to do. And I think that really formed the basis of how I like to lead and manage, which is treat people the way you want to be treated. Um, you know, I think it's not that hard, but it's amazing how few people do this. It's like I mean, I will take a step back and think about if I make a decision or make some changes, would I like it if I were in an engineer's or a manager's shoes? And I think that's super important. But it goes back to this leadership thing, right? And I hate using the term servant leader because it doesn't mean anything. But people throw that term out, so maybe people who are listening to this have heard that term. Um, but all it is just being empathetic and kind of treating people the way you need to be treated or want to be treated. Um, I think, one of the things you quickly mentioned, which I kind of, going back to one of the earlier questions about differences between, like, say, Europe and the United States,
Yeah.
culture-wise, is risk, right? There's different risk tolerances around different cultures and different geographies. And I've seen that a lot. And I think one of the things I think that's super important for in the technology business, especially if you're trying to establish a new product in a new market or trying to disrupt an existing market, you've got to take some chances. Whenever you take some chances, you probably will fail sometimes. And failing is okay, right? I mean, it's not, and if you do it right, it's not really failing. And you really, you try something, you fail fast, you learn, right? And because you learned, yeah, you failed in some aspects, but on the other hand, you learn something, and the next time you do it, you'll do it better. And I think one of the things I've always liked to try and get my teams to think about is really, what do you learn from these? And let's take some chances. Let's throw things out there and learn and try. Because don't be afraid.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think it comes down to that risk reward. And
Yeah,
also you got to look at calculated risk, versus just a risk. You obviously need to go in there with some thought and
sure.
some background knowledge, definitely. Um, yeah, maybe just a couple questions before we wrap up, Jeff, maybe just to get your thoughts on, a few things. I mean, you've obviously worked across, different industries. Where do you see AI making the biggest impact in the coming years?
I think if you asked me this question a month before, I would give a different answer. If you ask this question a month from now, I'll probably give a different answer.
Yeah.
Um, I think the rate of change of AI technologies is insane right now. And I think where today, if I look at just thinking about today, where I think AI could provide the biggest impact. Um, I think we all see it in summarizing documents, and we see it in, like, in social media now that it's being integrated into X, and I think Facebook's about to ship their similar thing where you can fact check a post on social media through the AI engine, which I think is super interesting for kind of the people that are complaining about all the misinformation out there, which I think is a real thing. But I also think, it's super great we use it at Twaice right now for doing RPQs, right? Contracts, just going through and summarizing a document and then writing the response. My engineering team uses some of the coding assistants to help with things. Um, uh, but I think also what the current generation of AIs are really good at is pattern recognition, which also plays into our products, right? When we're doing battery analytics, one of the things we want to be able to do is detect anomalies in battery systems and find things that could be risky, which could cause problems down the road. I think an AI is really good at pattern detection and helping us with that, much like any other data set. But will it replace engineering? I think that might be the next question. Do we need software developers anymore with AIs? A month ago, I would have said definitely we need software developments right now, software developers. Right now, I'm probably, yeah, we still need them, but I think AI can really make it so you can deliver a lot with many fewer people. Um, I think, I mean, there's a bunch of startups out there now that are looking at codeless application development, either just give them natural language descriptions of an application or feed them a Figma file and it produces an app. I think front end stuff, maybe we can do that with AIs, but some of the things that we're doing, for example, around this battery analytics requires some deep knowledge of the battery itself and the physical behavior of it. It's very specialized. Could we train an AI to do it? Sure. Will the current public AIs have that knowledge right now? Probably not, and we'd need to augment it. So I view it as a tool that helps engineers' productivity, and then doing a lot of the grunt work, and then you fill in the um, the details. It's actually very similar to what we've done with kind of transitioning to be a cloud service at Twaice, where I'm a big believer in using managed services on AWS, because I don't want to have a DevOps team to manage a database instance. Let's pay Amazon a little money, manage the database instance. My engineers can add value. And I think AI kind of ratchets that up a little bit more, where a lot of the code that is just generic cloud service code can be written by the AI, and then our engineering team can focus on the value pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect, Jeff. And then yeah, maybe just a final question to wrap up. And this is obviously for our viewers as well. We've got some younger viewers or listeners. If you could give yourself, one piece of advice, your younger self, what would it be?
Uh, I would say probably I will use my own advice that I said earlier, which is take more chances, because I think when I was younger, I was very, very afraid of failing and proving to the senior people and my managers that I could do my job. And I think that even as someone straight out of the university, or out of boot camp, wherever you're coming from into this industry now, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And I think also, having been and seen this, that, and you mentioned this earlier too, around the diversity question, but junior people come with problems from a very different perspective than an experienced person. And so I think don't be afraid to speak up, if you have a different idea than what your tech lead is talking about, because it might be a really good idea and it might be the next big thing.
Yeah. Yeah, brilliant, Jeff. Obviously, thank you very much for your time. It was great to speak to you, ask you a couple of questions, get some insight and obviously value add from you. So we really do appreciate it. Yeah, thank you for being on Vision to Venture.
All right, well, thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Vision to Venture. If you're listening, make sure to give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching, like and subscribe to listen to more inspiring stories from tech leaders.